The carriage hit the ravine at full speed, and Edmund Hargrove heard his own bones surrender before the darkness swallowed him whole. He didn't die. He almost wished he had, because when he clawed his way back to something like awareness, locked inside a body that refused every command, couldn't speak, couldn't so much as twitch a finger, he heard his wife's voice, clear as summer rain, sweet as slow poison. And what Phoebe said to the man standing at the foot of his bed shattered every last thing Edmund believed about his marriage. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see just how far this story travels. The morning it happened, Edmund Hargrove had been in fine spirits. That was the cruelest part of it, he would think later. Locked behind his own eyes with nothing to do but think. He'd been happy. Genuinely, stupidly happy. The wheat fields on the south side of Hargrove Estate had come in strong that summer of 1814. The heat was the kind that baked the earth golden and smelled like something God was proud of. And he'd told Thomas, his estate manager, that they were looking at the best harvest in a decade. "You say that every summer, sir," Thomas had answered, grinning from beneath the brim of his worn hat. "And every summer I'm right," Edmund had replied. He'd climbed into the carriage that morning with a letter in his coat pocket. Correspondence for Judge Alderton down in Charlottesville about the property expansion on the eastern boundary. Routine business, the kind of thing that filled an ordinary Tuesday in Virginia and didn't deserve a second thought. He never made it to Charlottesville. The carriage horse, a gray mare named Belle that had been perfectly steady for 6 years, shied violently at something in the road. Edmund never saw what it was. The carriage lurched, tipped, and then there was nothing but a sickening roll of sky and earth and the crack of wood and the impact of the ravine floor rising up to meet him. Then darkness. Then, after a time that felt like it could have been minutes or months, voices. The first voice he recognized was Dr. Samuel Greer's. "He's breathing, barely, but he's breathing." Edmund tried to answer, tried to say, "I know I'm breathing, Samuel. I can feel every inch of it." Nothing came. Not a syllable, not a groan. "Will he recover?" A woman's voice. Phoebe, his wife of 4 years. Edmund felt a wash of something warm move through his chest at the sound of her. Phoebe. Thank God. He tried again to move. A hand, a finger, his eyelids, anything. Nothing obeyed him. "It is too early to say, Mrs. Hargrove," the doctor said carefully. "The injury to his head and neck is significant. He may improve. He may remain in this state. There is a possibility—" A pause. "There is a possibility that he will not wake at all." Silence. Edmund waited for Phoebe to weep, to argue with the doctor, to demand he fight harder, look again, try something more. That was the woman he had married, fierce and beautiful and unwilling to accept any outcome that didn't suit her. What came instead was a long, slow breath. "I see," Phoebe said. 2 words, flat, composed. The kind of voice a woman used when she was told dinner would be delayed. "Phoebe." He screamed her name inside the locked room of his skull. "Phoebe! I'm here! I can hear you! I'm right here!" "How long," she asked, "before we might know one way or the other?" "Weeks, perhaps longer." "Weeks," she repeated, and then, "Thank you, Samuel. You may go." Edmund lay in the darkness of himself and listened to the doctor's footsteps cross the floor. The door opened, the door closed, and then his wife walked to the window. He could tell by the shift in her voice, the way sound moved in the room, and said, very quietly, to no one Edmund could identify, "Well, that changes things considerably, doesn't it?" It was not a question. He learned to track time by the light. He couldn't see it. His eyes remained closed, sealed shut by whatever damage had been done. But he could feel the difference between morning warmth and afternoon heat against the left side of his face where he lay. He could tell when candles were lit by the faint change in the air. He could feel when the room was full and when it was empty. He counted 4 days by light and dark before he understood the full shape of what was happening around him. Clara Whitmore, his housekeeper of 12 years, came each morning to wash his face and hands and speak quietly to him while she worked. Clara was 61 years old and had the kind of faith in God and in goodness that Edmund had always found both admirable and faintly exhausting. She did not know he could hear her. She spoke to him anyway.
"Now then, Mr. Hargrove,"
she'd say, wringing out the cloth in the basin.
"It's a fine morning. The roses by the east gate are coming in something lovely."
Thomas says the east field needs looking at, but I told him you'd want to see it yourself first, and so he can just wait. On the 4th morning, her voice dropped to something smaller. "I don't know if you can hear me, sir. I reckon probably you can't. But just in case." She paused. "Something ain't right in this house. I don't know how to say it plainer than that. Something ain't right." Edmund's heart, the one part of him that seemed to work just fine, beat hard against his ribs. "Mrs. Hargrove had a gentleman call her yesterday afternoon," Clara continued, her voice careful and low. "A Mr. Aldrich. He's an attorney, sir, from Richmond. Mrs. Hargrove didn't tell the staff he was coming. I only know because I brought the tea myself when Mary was busy with the linens." A pause. "They weren't speaking about your health, sir. I can tell you that much." What were they speaking about, Clara? He pushed the words with everything in him. "Nothing. I've been in this household since before you inherited it from your father," Clara said. "And I know what a vulture sounds like when it's circling, even when it's wearing a fine coat and good boots." She finished her work in silence. At the door, she stopped. "You come back to us, Mr. Hargrove. You hear me? Whatever strength you got left in you, you use it to come back." The attorney, Aldrich, returned on the 7th day. Edmund had made a discovery by then. He could, if he concentrated with everything he had, produce the faintest sensation in the tips of the fingers on his right hand. Not movement, not yet, but sensation, feeling, the edge of something returning. He filed that away in the back of his mind like a card held close to the chest and lay very, very still. Aldrich had a voice like polished furniture, smooth, expensive, not quite trustworthy. "The document is prepared as we discussed," he said. "Once it's signed, the estate transfers to you as primary administrator, with full authority over all financial decisions pending his recovery." "And if he doesn't recover?" Phoebe asked. "Then it transfers in full, no complications." "He has a cousin in Maryland," Phoebe said. "Robert. Edmund was always fond of him." "Robert Hargrove has no legal standing in this matter, if the documents are executed correctly. He can challenge it, certainly, but challenges take time and money. And you will have both, Mrs. Hargrove, while he has neither." A pause. "Show me where to sign," Phoebe said. Edmund lay there and felt the floor of the world fall away beneath him. He had given her that? He understood it now, with a cold clarity that was almost like grief. In the first year of their marriage, flush with something he'd called love, and now wasn't sure had a name, he had given Phoebe power of attorney over his affairs in the event of his incapacitation. It had seemed a loving thing then, responsible, the kind of provision a good husband made. He heard the scratch of a pen across paper. "You fool," he told himself. "You magnificent fool." The days that followed were an education in the woman he had married. Phoebe came to see him twice daily, morning and evening. In the mornings, she was brief, a glance, a sigh, a performance for whoever happened to be in the hallway.
Still no change, poor thing.
In the evenings, she came alone and did not bother with performance. On the 9th evening, she sat in the chair beside his bed, and he heard her pour herself a glass of wine, and she spoke to him the way a person speaks to furniture, without expectation of response, simply because the room required sound.
"You were never cruel to me," she said. "I want you to know I understand that. You were never unkind."
A sip.
"But you were so terribly dull, Edmund. You talked about wheat and property lines and county politics, and you never once asked me what I wanted, what I actually wanted."
Then you should have told me, he thought. You should have said.
"Aldridge has a buyer for the East Field," she continued.
"A mill operator from Fredericksburg. The price is excellent. Thomas will object, of course. Thomas objects to everything. I'll have him let go by the end of the month." Edmund felt something move in the fingers of his right hand. Not sensation this time. Movement. He stopped breathing, or near enough, and pressed every ounce of his will into his right hand, lying against the coverlet at his side. He felt his index finger drag, barely, against the fabric. 1/4 of an inch. Less. But it moved. He let the breath out slowly, steadily, the way a man breathes when he is unconscious and mustn't let on otherwise. Not yet, he told himself. Not yet. On the 12th day, Phoebe made her first mistake. She brought someone to see him, not Aldridge, not the doctor. A man whose footsteps were lighter, whose breathing Edmund didn't recognize. He heard the door close with a particular softness, the kind that meant Phoebe didn't want it heard from the hallway. "He looks peaceful enough," the stranger said. "He looks exactly as he has for 12 days. Phoebe's voice carried something Edmund had never heard from her before, something unguarded. "The doctor says there's been no change." "And there won't be," the man said. "You told me yourself the doctor gave him very little hope." "I told you what the doctor told me." A silence. Then the sound of movement. Cloth, a shifted weight. And Phoebe's voice went lower, softer. "You have to be careful, Harrison. If anyone sees you here—" "No one will see me. Your housekeeper is in the kitchen, and the rest of the staff does as you say." A pause. "How much longer?" "As long as it takes," Phoebe said. "I won't rush it. A wife who rushes grief draws attention. A wife who delays her inheritance also draws attention. I know what I'm doing." "I know you do." The man's voice carried admiration in it, and something else. A possessiveness that turned Edmund's stomach to cold stone. "You always do." Edmund lay absolutely still. He catalogued what he knew. Phoebe had given Aldridge authority to transfer the estate. She intended to sell the East Field, the most productive land on the property, to a mill buyer. She planned to dismiss Thomas, and she had a man, this Harrison, waiting in the wings with enough familiarity to be alone with her in her husband's bedroom, while her husband lay not 6 feet away. The list was thorough. Edmund Hargrove was a methodical man. He had always believed that the truth, gathered carefully and completely, was the most powerful thing in the world. He began, in the quiet laboratory of his own skull, to build a plan. Clara came on the 14th morning with her cloth and her basin and her careful voice. "Morning, sir. It's a warm one already, even this early." She wrung the cloth, touched it to his forehead. "Thomas got his notice yesterday. Mrs. Hargrove had the letter sent to his quarters, like he was a stranger,
and not a man who's given 20 years to this estate." Her voice caught slightly. "He took it hard, sir. He took it very hard." Edmund moved his right hand. Not a twitch, not a drag. He moved 3 fingers, deliberately, against the coverlet. A small motion, but a real one. Clara went still. "Mr. Hargrove?" Her voice dropped to barely a breath. He moved the fingers again. "Sweet, merciful Lord," Clara whispered. "Sweet, merciful Lord in heaven." He felt her hand close over his, warm, strong, shaking. "Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." He squeezed. It was weak. It cost him more than he could measure. But it was a real squeeze. Clara made a sound he'd never heard from her in 12 years. Something between a sob and a laugh. "All right," she breathed. "All right. You listen to me now." Her voice dropped so low it was barely a vibration. "You don't tell anyone. You understand me? Not yet. Whatever is happening in this house, you ain't ready yet. And she has got Aldridge and God knows who else already paid and happy. You hear me? You stay still. You get stronger. And when you're ready," her hand tightened on his, "you let me know." Edmund squeezed her hand once more. Yes. Clara straightened. He heard her compose herself. A steadying breath, the smoothing of an apron. "Fine morning," she said, in her normal voice, for the benefit of anyone outside the door. "Roses are still lovely by the east gate." He spent the next week pretending to be exactly what they believed him to be. It was the hardest thing Edmund Hargrove had ever done. Harder than the carriage accident. Harder than lying in the dark not knowing if his body would ever come back to him. Harder even than hearing Phoebe sign those documents. He lay still through Phoebe's evening visits and her casual plans for the estate he'd spent his life building. He lay still when Aldridge came twice more with paperwork and a voice like polished furniture. He lay still when Harrison visited again and stayed too long and spoke in that easy, possessive way of a man who already believed he'd won. He lay still and he listened, and he built his plan brick by careful brick. On the 21st day, Edmund Hargrove could move his entire right hand, 3 fingers on his left, and, with tremendous effort, turn his head a fraction of an inch to the right. Not yet. On the 24th day, he whispered 2 words to Clara Whitmore in the gray hour before dawn. His voice was barely sound, dry and cracked and thin as paper, but it was a voice. "Get Thomas." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. "Yes, sir," she said. "Lord above, yes, sir." Thomas came at midnight, when the house was quiet. Edmund heard him cross the floor, that familiar heavy tread, the slight drag on the left heel from an old riding injury. "Mr. Hargrove," Thomas's voice broke on the second word, broke clean in half. "Lord have mercy. We all thought." "Quiet," Edmund breathed. It cost him. "Listen." "Sir, you need the doctor." "Not yet. Listen to me, Thomas." A pause, then, "I'm listening." "The Eastfield buyer," Edmund said, each word slow and deliberate and burning in his throat. "What's his name?" "Miller named Hoskins, sir, from Fredericksburg. Deals near Set." "Kill it." "Sir." "You still have my power of attorney on the field sale documentation. I signed those last winter. Aldridge's newer document supersedes it on the estate, but not on individual land transactions pending at the time of incapacitation." He stopped, gathered air. "I know the law on this, Thomas. I need you to trust me." Silence. "She fired me," Thomas said. "I'm aware.
I still got a week before I'm meant to go." "Then you've got a week," Edmund said, "and I've got a plan." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Edmund heard him turn his hat in his hands, felt the air shift with it. "What do you need from me?" Thomas asked. Edmund breathed in, breathed out. "I need you to send a letter to my cousin Robert in Maryland," he said. "Don't send it from the estate. Ride to town yourself. And I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Harrison." He paused. "Don't ask Phoebe. Don't let on. Just find out who he is and where he comes from and what he owns." "And then?" "And then," Edmund said, "I'm going to stand up." Thomas let out a breath that was almost a laugh, rough and disbelieving and fierce. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "God willing." "God willing," Edmund agreed. He lay in the darkness of himself and felt, for the first time in 24 days, something that was not rage and not grief and not the cold calculation of a trapped man running numbers in his head. He felt like himself. Thomas rode out before dawn, and Edmund spent the hours counting his own heartbeats. That was how he measured progress now, not by the light, not by Clara's visits, not by the slow turn of days. He measured it by what his body would give him when he pushed. A finger, a wrist, the long, grinding work of asking a hand to close and feeling it obey. He had become a scientist of himself, and the laboratory was a bed he hadn't left in 3.5 weeks. He pushed his right arm flat against the coverlet and pressed down. Pushed. Felt the shaking start in his shoulder. Pushed through it. The elbow lifted a fraction. His teeth ground together. The elbow lifted another fraction. Then his arm gave out entirely, and he lay still, breathing like a man who'd run a mile. Not enough, he told himself. Not nearly enough. But more than yesterday. He held on to that. Phoebe came at her usual hour, just past 8, when the morning staff was busy and the hallway was quiet enough for her to slip in and out without comment. He heard her pause at the foot of his bed, heard the small sound she made that might have been a sigh. "Dr. Greer's coming Friday," she said. Not to him, to the room, the way she always spoke to the room in the evenings, as if he were already a piece of furniture in it. "I've asked him to give a more formal assessment, something I can put in writing." A pause. "Something for the attorneys." Edmund kept his breathing slow, steady, the breathing of a man who is not listening to every syllable and cataloging it. "Harrison wants to move faster," Phoebe continued. "He's impatient. I told him impatience is a young man's mistake." She set something down on the table. The wine glass, he thought. But he's not entirely wrong. 4 weeks is a long time for a wife to be managing an estate alone. People talk. Let them talk, Edmund thought. Keep talking yourself. By autumn, it should all be settled, she said, one way or another. She left without touching him. She never touched him anymore. Thomas came back on the second night. The house was deep in sleep, and Edmund heard him come through the kitchen passage the way Clara had arranged. Quiet. Boot heels wrapped in cloth so they didn't ring on the floor. He felt the chair pull close to his bedside, heard Thomas settle his weight into it. "You awake, sir?" Thomas asked, barely a breath. Edmund turned his head. It moved a full inch now, almost imperceptible from across the room, but to the two of them, it was everything. "Tell me," Edmund said. Thomas exhaled. "Harrison. His full name is Gerald Harrison. He's out of Baltimore originally. Came to Virginia about 2 years back. Calls himself a land investor." A beat. "He ain't a land investor, sir." "What is he?" "He's a creditor. A quiet one. The kind that doesn't put his name on things he shouldn't have his name on." Thomas's voice dropped lower.
I talked to a man in town, fella named Breckett, who does work for the county clerk's office. He says Harrison has been involved in 3 property transfers in the last 4 years that all went the same way. Husband falls on hard times, or falls down a flight of stairs, or gets sick sudden, and wife finds herself needing counsel. Harrison provides the counsel. Harrison walks away with a percentage interest in whatever transfers. Edmund lay still. He's done this before, he said. 3 times that Breckett knows of. Maybe more. Thomas paused. Sir, I don't think Mrs. Hargrove found Harrison by accident. I think Harrison found her. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. Edmund had spent 25 days believing this was Phoebe's betrayal, Phoebe's greed, Phoebe's choice. The possibility that she was also, in some fashion, a piece being moved on a board she hadn't designed, was the kind of complication that made a careful man's blood go cold. Not because it excused her. Nothing would excuse her. But because it meant Harrison was more dangerous than Edmund had calculated, and a man who miscalculated his enemy was a man who lost. The letter to Robert, Edmund said. Did you send it? Posted it myself from the tavern in Finley Crossing, 3 days ago. Thomas hesitated. He should have it by now. Whether he'll answer fast enough is another question. Robert will come, Edmund said. He's stubborn, and he doesn't trust lawyers. And he loved my father. He'll come. And if he doesn't get here in time? Edmund was quiet for a moment. Then we work with what we have, he said. Thomas turned his hat in his hands. Edmund heard the familiar motion of it, the soft turning, cloth against cloth, that Thomas always did when he was thinking hard about something he didn't want to say. There's something else, Thomas said. Say it. Aldridge was here again yesterday afternoon. I wasn't meant to know. Clara saw the carriage from the upstairs window. He paused. He stayed 2 hours, sir, and when he left, Mrs. Hargrove had the look of a woman who'd settled something that'd been unsettled. Edmund's right hand closed slowly into a fist beneath the coverlet. 2 hours, he said. Yes, sir. Find out what was signed. He kept his voice flat, kept it steady. Don't confront anyone, just find out. How? Aldridge has a clerk, young man, can't be more than 20. Clara would know his name. Young men with guilty knowledge and modest salaries tend to develop consciences when someone kind speaks to them plainly. He paused. Take him to the tavern if you have to. Buy him a meal. Tell him you're asking out of loyalty to the Duke. Most people, Thomas, want a reason to do the right thing. Give him one. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, sir. He stood to go. At the door, he stopped. Sir, for what it's worth. His voice went rough. There isn't a soul on this estate, the ones that still here, who wouldn't go to the wall for you. You know that. Edmund felt something press hard against the inside of his chest. I know, he said. Tell them to hold on a little longer. Dr. Greer arrived on Friday, as promised. He was a thorough man, Samuel Greer. Thorough and decent, and not particularly given to drama. Edmund had always liked him for exactly that. He came, he examined, he spoke carefully, and didn't oversell his conclusions in either direction. He checked Edmund's pulse, his eyes, the reflexes in his hands and feet. He spoke in professional murmurs to himself as he worked. Edmund lay absolutely still, breathing slowly, willing every muscle in his body to hold the shape of a man who was not getting better. It cost him more than the doctor could know. No measurable change, Greer said finally to Phoebe. He remains in the same condition. No improvement at all? Phoebe's voice carried the perfect weight of a concerned wife. Worry threaded with exhaustion. The sound of a woman managing grief with dignity. Edmund could have almost believed it himself,
if he hadn't spent 27 days being educated. I'm afraid not. The brain is a complicated organ, Mrs. Hargrove. In cases like this, months can pass without— I understand. Phoebe cut him off gently. The gently was important. It signaled a woman at her limit, too tired for long medical explanations. I appreciate you coming, Samuel. I do. It's just— Her voice softened. It's very difficult. Not knowing. Of course it is, the doctor said. If there is any change, any at all, send for me immediately. I will. Thank you. After Greer left, Phoebe stood at the window for a long time without speaking. Edmund waited. Well, she said at last, and there was something in her voice he couldn't quite name. That buys some time. She didn't say whose time she meant. He didn't need her to. Clara brought news on the 28th morning, and she brought it with the particular tightness in her voice that Edmund had learned to hear as alarm wearing a calm face. Mrs. Hargrove has been writing letters, she said, wringing the cloth over the basin. I didn't read them, I wouldn't. But I saw the stack of them yesterday when I brought her tea, and there were at least a dozen. She paused. She sent for the seamstress yesterday as well, sir, from Charlottesville, the good one. Edmund waited. Clara's voice dropped. She ordered black fabric, sir, a good quantity of it. The words landed like stones in still water. Mourning clothes. Phoebe was ordering mourning clothes. Not because he was dead, because she intended to be seen wearing them soon. Needed them ready. Needed the visual language of widowhood available when the moment came. Edmund felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in nearly 4 weeks. Something cold and focused and sharp-edged. Not quite anger. Past anger. Through it. Something that lived on the other side of rage and had its own kind of clarity. He moved his right hand, then his left. Then he pressed both palms flat against the mattress and pushed. His upper body lifted 2 inches off the bed before his arm shook out and he collapsed back. 2 inches. Mr. Hargrove. Clara's voice was barely sound. Don't. Not yet. You'll exhaust yourself. I'm fine, he said. You are not fine. You are a man who couldn't move his fingers 10 days ago, and you were trying to sit up, and you are not fine. Her hand pressed firmly on his shoulder, not to hold him down, but to steady him. Listen to me. Whatever she's planning, it ain't tomorrow. She's a careful woman, I'll give her that. Careful and patient. A pause. You be more patient. You get stronger, and you wait for your moment. Edmund breathed. She's ordered mourning fabric, he said. I know what she ordered. That means she's setting a timeline. I know what it means. Clara's hand on his shoulder didn't move. And I know that standing up tomorrow, when you can barely lift your own arms, ain't going to stop it. You stand up when you can do it right. You stand up when it counts. Her voice dropped to something fierce and quiet. You get one chance at this, sir. One. Don't waste it by going early. He lay still. She was right. He hated that she was right. He lay still and breathed and counted the strength in his arms and found it lacking and accepted that, for now, he had to be patient. All right, he said. Good, Clara said, and then, briskly, now eat. I brought broth, and I'm not leaving until you've had all of it. And if you argue with me, I will sit in this chair all day, and you can explain to Mrs. Hargrove why I'm here. Despite everything, Edmund very nearly smiled. Robert Hargrove arrived on the 31st day, He arrived unannounced, which was typical of Robert, and he arrived in a temper, which was also typical of Robert. And he arrived at the front door of the estate and refused to be turned away by the housemaid who answered, which was the most Robert thing of all. Edmund heard it from the upstairs, the raised voice in the entry hall, the firm and unapologetic carrying power of a man who had grown up arguing with lawyers and county officials and was not especially impressed by domestic staff. "I am Robert Hargrove of Annapolis, Maryland, and that is my cousin lying in that bed, and I will not be received at the door like a tradesman. Step aside." He heard Phoebe's footsteps, quick, sharp, the sound of a woman recalibrating rapidly. And then her voice, warm and sad and welcoming, sliding in over Robert's like water covering rock.
"Robert, of course. Please come in. I'm so glad you came."
"I wrote to you myself just last week. You must have been already traveling when my letter arrived. Come in, come in. He'd want you here." A pause. "Would he?" Robert said. It was not a question. He would. Of course he would. Robert's footsteps on the stairs were heavy and deliberate. He came into the room, and Edmund felt his cousin's presence the way he'd felt it since they were boys. A particular solidity, an unmistakable Robertness. He heard the intake of breath when Robert saw him. "Edmund," Robert said, very quietly. Edmund did not move. Could not. Not here. Not with Phoebe in the doorway. He breathed slowly, steadily. "He looks—" Robert stopped. "I know," Phoebe said softly. "It's difficult to see. The doctor believes he may not wake. But we're still hoping." Robert was silent for a long moment. Edmund felt the room hold its breath. "I'd like some time alone with him," Robert said. "If you don't mind." A beat. The faintest hesitation from the doorway.
"Of course," Phoebe said. "I'll have tea sent up."
The footsteps retreated. The door did not fully close. Edmund registered the gap by the sound of air in the hallway. And he waited, counted to 15, and then spoke.
"She's listening," he breathed. 3 feet from the door."
Robert went completely still. Then, in a voice that was almost perfectly natural, almost, but not quite, if you knew Robert well enough, and Edmund did, his cousin pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down and said, "Poor devil. I came as fast as I could, old man. You look terrible, you know. Always were vain about your appearance." Edmund nearly laughed, turned it into a slow exhale.
"There's a letter," he breathed. "Clara has it. Don't ask for it here."
Robert said, loudly enough to carry. "I'll stay a few days if that's all right with Phoebe. Can't bear to leave him like this." The door shifted. Phoebe's voice came through the gap, smooth, gracious, utterly controlled.
"You're welcome as long as you'd like, Robert. Edmund would want family near."
"Thank you, Phoebe," Robert said. "You're very kind." After she moved away, Edmund tracked the footsteps down the hall, down the stairs. Robert leaned forward in his chair and dropped his voice to next to nothing. "Thomas met me at the gate," he said. "Filled me in. God almighty, Edmund. I know. Harrison is bad business. I made some inquiries of my own on the road. There's a family in Alexandria." "Later," Edmund said. "Not here." "Right." A pause. "How long before you can move?" Edmund pressed both palms against the mattress, pushed, rose 4 inches before the shaking took over. "Another week," he said. "Maybe less." "And what's the plan when you do?" "Phoebe has arranged something," Edmund said. "Some kind of formal gathering. She's been writing letters and ordering mourning fabric."
He paused. I don't know the exact shape of it yet, but she's staging something public.
Public, Robert repeated. Why public? Because a public declaration is harder to walk back. If she announces my condition to assembled witnesses, announces her intention to take the estate formally, it becomes a matter of community record. Edmund breathed. And a man rising from his sickbed to contradict that record is either a miracle or a scandal, and either way, it's memorable. Robert was quiet for a moment. You want it public, he said slowly. I want every one of those witnesses to see exactly what she is, Edmund said. I want Aldridge in the room. I want Harrison in the room. I want all of it to happen where no one can pretend later they didn't see it. His cousin exhaled, long and slow. That is either the smartest thing I've ever heard, Robert said, or the second dumbest after marrying her in the first place. This time, Edmund did not stop the sound. A small, rough, almost laugh buried under a cough before it could carry. Help me sit up, he said. I need to practice. Edmund, help me sit up, Robert. A pause. Then Robert's hands closed under his arms, steady and sure, and Edmund Hargrove gritted his teeth and pushed against the weight of 5 weeks of stillness, and the room tilted, and his vision went to stars behind his closed eyes, and his arms screamed, and he did not stop. He sat up. He sat there, swaying, held partly by Robert's grip, breathing like a man surfacing from deep water. Lord have mercy, Robert said, low and careful. Good, Edmund said. His voice was thin. His whole body was shaking. That's good. Is it? Because you look like you're about to fall sideways. I'm not, Edmund breathed. I won't. He held the position for 10 seconds, then 20. Then his arms gave, and Robert eased him back down, and he lay staring at the ceiling he hadn't seen in over a month, or near enough to seeing it that it counted. 1 week, Edmund said again. 1 week, Robert agreed. He didn't sound convinced. Edmund closed his eyes. From downstairs, faint but clear, came the sound of Phoebe's voice, warm, measured, the voice of a woman confidently managing a household, a woman who believed she had already won. Edmund lay in the bed that was nearly no longer his and thought about the look on her face when she learned she was wrong. He thought about it in very great detail. That kept him going. It was Clara who brought the news that set the clock. She came before dawn on the 34th day, earlier than her usual time, her footsteps faster than they should have been, and she pressed the door shut behind her and crossed the room and bent close. She sent invitations, Clara breathed. I found one on the writing table in the morning room. She was careless, left it out when she went to dress. A pause. Mrs. Hargrove is hosting a gathering next Saturday. She's calling it a prayer gathering, sir, for your health and the future of the estate. Edmund felt every nerve in his body come alive. Who is invited? Judge Alderton, the county commissioner, Reverend Parks. Clara's voice was barely a thread. Aldridge, and a dozen of the most prominent families in the county. And Harrison? His name wasn't on the invitation I saw, but sir, she paused. Sir, that doesn't mean he won't be there. Edmund pressed his palms flat against the mattress. Saturday, he said. 6 days, sir. 6 days. He thought about what he could and couldn't do. He thought about standing, about walking across a room, about appearing before a judge and a commissioner and a reverend and 12 families with the bearing of a man who had not spent 5 weeks in a bed. It wasn't enough time. He knew it wasn't enough time. He also knew he didn't have a choice. Wake Robert, he said. Clara straightened. Now?
It's barely 4 in the morning."
"Wake Robert," Edmund said again, "and bring Thomas, and tell them both that the plan just got moved up." He pressed himself upward, arms shaking, the familiar burn spreading through his shoulders, and held himself at a 45-degree angle against the headboard. "Because Saturday is when this ends." Clara looked at him for a long moment. The gray light before dawn caught the lines of her face. All those years of loyalty and quiet watching and saying nothing when she should have said something, and saying everything when it counted most.
"Yes, sir,"
she said. And for the first time in 34 days, Edmund Hargrove's voice carried something solid and dangerous in it. The voice of a man who was done lying still. "Let's get to work," he said. 6 days was not enough time. Edmund knew it the moment he said it, and he knew it again every morning when Robert helped him sit up before dawn, and every evening when his arms gave out after 20 minutes of pushing against his own dead weight. 6 days was not enough time to rebuild a body that 5 weeks of stillness had hollowed out. It was not enough time to become the man he'd been before the carriage hit the ravine. But it was enough time to become something. And something was what he needed. Robert took to the work with the focused grimness of a man who understood the stakes and didn't waste breath complaining about them. He came before the household stirred, and after it settled. And in between, he moved through Charlottesville and Finley Crossing, and every tavern and courthouse corridor in between, with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who appeared to be doing nothing in particular. He had always been good at that, at looking like a man passing through, while actually being a man digging down. Thomas worked the other angle. The clerk from Aldridge's office, a young man named Foster, barely 22, with the guilty eyes of someone who'd signed his name to things he shouldn't have, took 3 days and 2 meals at the Finley Tavern before he cracked. When he did, he cracked completely. Thomas came to Edmund on the Thursday evening, 2 days before the gathering, and the thing he brought with him was not good news. It was worse than not good. It was the kind of information that changed the shape of everything Edmund thought he knew. "Foster gave me the document," Thomas said, voice low, the hallway outside the bedroom door empty and quiet. "The one Aldridge had her sign 3 weeks ago." "And?" Thomas set the folded paper on the bed beside Edmund's right hand. "It's not a power of attorney, sir. It's a deed of trust." Edmund's hand went still on the paper. "Say that again." "A deed of trust. She didn't just transfer administrative authority over the estate. She transferred the estate itself, held in trust under Aldridge's firm, with her as beneficiary." Thomas's voice was careful and tight. "If you are declared legally incapacitated or deceased, the trust executes immediately. Everything. The house, the fields, the timber rights on the north boundary, the livestock, all of it. And if I'm neither declared incapacitated nor deceased, then the trust is void and the document means nothing." Thomas paused. "But that's not the part that worried me, sir." Edmund waited. "The trust names a co-beneficiary," Thomas said, "alongside Mrs. Hargrove. 50% of the estate's value goes to her. The other 50 goes to a holding company registered in Baltimore." He stopped. "The holding company is called Meridian Land Partners." Edmund said nothing for a moment. "Harrison," he said. "Yes, sir. Robert confirmed it this morning. Meridian Land Partners is Harrison's company. He's held it under 3 different names over the last 8 years." Thomas exhaled. "He wasn't just waiting for Phoebe to get him a percentage, sir. He was always going to walk away with half." The room was very quiet. Edmund thought about Phoebe, her careful voice, her composed face, her patient scheming. Then he thought about whether she knew,
whether she understood that the man she'd taken as a partner had already carved out his share before she'd even finished signing.
"Does she know?" he asked. Thomas hesitated. "I don't think so, sir. The co-beneficiary clause is buried in the second addendum." Foster said Aldridge presented it as standard legal language. A beat. "She thinks she's getting everything. Harrison let her believe that." Edmund pressed his palms flat against the mattress and pushed himself upright. The shake came. It always came. And he breathed through it, held himself steady against the headboard, and thought very carefully. Harrison had played Phoebe the same way Phoebe had played Edmund. The entire architecture of the last 5 weeks looked different now. Phoebe's betrayal was real. Her greed was real. Her choices were entirely her own. But Harrison had found her, cultivated her, pointed her at Edmund like a weapon, and all the while he'd arranged to collect half the spoils, regardless of what she believed she was doing. It was elegant. Edmund hated how elegant it was. "Saturday," he said. "2 days, sir. I need Robert. Now." Robert came within the hour. He sat in the chair by the bed and listened without interrupting while Edmund laid it out. And when Edmund finished, Robert was quiet for a long time. "She doesn't know Harrison's taking half," Robert said. "That's what Thomas believes." "What do you believe?" Edmund thought about it honestly. "I believe she's too smart not to have read the documents. And I believe Harrison is smart enough to have made sure the language was obscure enough that a proud woman wouldn't ask for clarification." He paused. "Whether she knew or didn't know doesn't change what I need from Saturday." "Which is what, exactly?" "Everything exposed in the same room." Edmund's voice was flat and deliberate. "Aldridge, Harrison, the deed of trust, all of it, in front of Judge Alderton and Commissioner Burrell and 12 families who can serve as witnesses." He met his cousin's eyes. Still strange, the act of meeting eyes, after 5 weeks of darkness. "I don't want a legal proceeding that Aldridge can drag out for 2 years. I want it over. I want it done in one room, on one afternoon, where there's no room left for anyone to maneuver." Robert was quiet for a moment. "And what exactly do you plan to do when you walk in there? You can barely stand for 20 minutes. "Then I only need to stand for 10. "Edmund, I need 10 minutes, Robert, that's all." He held his cousin's gaze. "Can you get me 10 minutes? Robert looked at him for a long time. Looked at the shaking in his hands, and the gray under his eyes, and the particular quality of stubborn that Edmund had been wearing on his face since they were 12 years old, and their uncle told Edmund he wasn't fit to inherit his father's estate. "I'll get you 12, Robert said, "just to be safe." That Friday came and went in a blur of preparation that Edmund felt in every muscle. Clara pressed his coat, the dark blue wool one, the one he'd worn the day he signed the deed to the East Field, the one that still smelled faintly of the outdoors and of himself before any of this. She brought it to him that evening and laid it carefully over the back of the chair, and neither of them spoke about what it meant. Thomas had handled the Hoskins Mill deal, quietly, legally, using the older power of attorney documentation the way Edmund had instructed. The Eastfield sale had been stopped cold. Hoskins had been notified through a letter from Edmund's own desk, signed by Thomas under Edmund's authority, that the property was no longer available. When Aldridge learned of it, and he would learn of it, the timing would be informative. Robert had spent Friday in Charlottesville. He came back with two things: a letter from a colleague in Baltimore who knew Meridian Land Partners by reputation, and the name of the third family Harrison had done this to, a widow named Margaret Payne, whose estate outside Alexandria had been fully absorbed by Meridian within 6 months of her husband's death from a sudden illness. A sudden illness. Edmund sat with that for a while in the dark Friday night. Robert's chair pulled close, candle burning low. "Do you think Phoebe understands what she got herself into?" Robert asked. "Not the legal piece. The other piece." Edmund was quiet. "I think she knows exactly what she is," he said finally. "I think she made her choices with clear eyes." He paused. "I think she may not know how expendable she is to Harrison once the estate transfers. But that's her problem now, not mine." "Cold," Robert said. "She ordered mourning clothes," Edmund said, "before I was dead." Robert had nothing to say to that. Saturday morning arrived like a held breath. The house woke early, more staff moving than usual, the particular controlled chaos of a household preparing to receive guests. Phoebe had clearly given detailed instructions. Edmund could hear it all from his room. The clatter from the kitchen, the quick footsteps on the stairs, the sound of good china being moved from its cabinet. He was already awake, had been awake since 3 in the morning, lying in the dark, doing what he'd been doing for 6 days. Pushing, working, demanding that his body cooperate one more time. At 7, Clara came. She didn't say good morning. She just looked at him, and he looked at her, and then she helped him swing his legs over the side of the bed. He sat there on the edge of it for a moment. The floor looked very far away. His feet found it anyway. "Robert's outside," Clara said quietly. "Good. The guests are expected at 2 o'clock. "I know." She stood in front of him and put both her hands on his face. An extraordinary thing, the kind of thing a woman only does when years of loyalty and love have dissolved every formality between two people. And she looked at him the way his mother had looked at him when he was 8 years old, and had fallen off a horse and refused to cry. "You come back to us right," she said. "You hear me? You come back to us right." "Yes, ma'am," Edmund said. She let go, stepped back, composed herself in the way that Clara composed herself, which was the way a woman composes herself when she's holding everything together through sheer force of character and can't afford to let it show. "I'll send Robert in," she said. By noon, Edmund could cross the room and back, slowly, with Robert's hand under his arm the first 2 times, and without it the third. His legs shook on the return trip, and he had to stop and breathe with his hand pressed against the wall. And Robert didn't say anything, which was the best thing Robert could have done. "One more time," Edmund said. "You've done it 4 times already." "One more." He crossed the room again, made it back, stood at the window and listened to the world outside, the birdsong, the creak of the gate, the ordinary sounds of a summer morning in Virginia, and thought about everything the last 36 days had given him. Not just the anger, not just the plan. He thought about Thomas, who had stayed, about Clara, who had known before anyone and kept the faith, about Robert, who had ridden from Maryland without fully understanding why, and stayed without needing to be asked. He thought about what a man owed the people who carried him when he couldn't carry himself. "What time is it?" he asked. 12:30, Robert said. "They'll arrive by 2. Alderton is never late." Edmund turned from the window. "And Harrison?" "He's not on the invitation list." "He'll come with Phoebe's acknowledgement. She'll have told him." Edmund moved to the chair, slowly, carefully, sitting the way a man sits when his body is still deciding whether it wants to cooperate. "He won't miss this." Robert sat across from him. "You know she's going to make an announcement today." "I know." "Whatever she's planned, it's going to happen fast. She's had weeks to set this up."
I know that too. Edmund looked at his cousin. Which is why we let it start. We let her get far enough in that there's no walking it back. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. You want her to hang herself. I want everyone in that room to hear exactly what she is, Edmund said. Not my word against hers, her word against itself. He paused. When the time comes, you'll know it. How will I know it? Because I'll stand up, Edmund said. 2:00 came the way judgment always comes. Inevitable, ordinary seeming right up until the moment it wasn't. Edmund heard the carriages, heard the voices in the entryway, Judge Alderton's formal baritone, Commissioner Burrell's jovial county politician's laugh, the Reverend Parks murmuring something pious. Heard Phoebe's voice moving through it all like a thread through a needle, graceful, subdued, the perfect weight of a woman hosting under grief. He sat in his room and counted voices. Aldridge arrived at 2:15. Edmund knew his voice now the way he knew his own heartbeat. Harrison arrived at 2:30, and he arrived quietly, which meant Phoebe had arranged a side entrance, which meant she knew perfectly well he shouldn't be there in any official capacity. Edmund filed that away. At 2:45, Phoebe's voice gathered the room. He could hear it clearly. The house carried sound well, always had, which was something Phoebe had clearly not considered carefully enough. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "I know this is unusual. I know some of you expected only a prayer gathering, and we will have that. Reverend Parks has been gracious enough to lead us." A pause. "But first, I need to speak to you all honestly. As neighbors, as friends, as people who have known Edmund and known this estate, and have a right to understand what the future holds." Judge Alderton's voice. "Phoebe, whatever you need." "Edmund is not going to recover," she said. The words came out clean and composed. Not theatrical. That was what made it effective. Just calm. Just stated. "The doctor has told me. His family has been notified. I have spent 5 weeks hoping for a different answer, and there isn't one." A breath. "And so I have to think about what Edmund would have wanted. For the estate. For the people on it. For the county he cared about." Aldridge's voice, smooth and well-timed. "Mrs. Hargrove has been admirably thoughtful in her planning." Edmund put his hand on the doorframe. He heard Phoebe continue. "I have worked with counsel to ensure a clean transition of the estate's administration, in keeping with the legal arrangements Edmund himself put in place." Robert was beside him. His hand found Edmund's arm. "Now?" Robert murmured. Edmund listened, waited. Let her go a beat further. Let Alderton lean in. Let Burrell nod. Let the Reverend bow his head. Let every witness in that room receive the full shape of what she was building. Then he said, "Now." He stepped through the door. The hallway was empty. The stairs were not long, but they were stairs, and each one cost him something real. Robert stayed one step behind, close enough to catch if catching became necessary, far enough that it wasn't visible support. Edmund gripped the banister and moved. He heard Phoebe's voice still going below, heard the exact moment she said, "Edmund's wishes," and the particular smoothness with which she said it, and he kept moving. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He turned toward the drawing room. He put his hand on the door. And Edmund Hargrove, who had been lying in a bed for 5 weeks while his wife arranged his future without him, pushed the door open and walked into the room. The silence was absolute. He saw Phoebe first. She was standing near the fireplace with her hands folded in front of her, and the expression that crossed her face when she saw him was not guilt,
and it was not fear. It was something faster and more animal than either of those things. It was the expression of a person whose entire plan has just stepped through a door. He saw Alderton's jaw go slack. Burrell grip the arm of his chair. Reverend Parks rise halfway from his seat. He saw the row of county families, 12 of them, every face turned toward him with the collective expression of people witnessing something they would describe for the rest of their lives. He saw Aldridge in the corner go very still in the way that calculating men go still when they are rapidly recalculating. And he saw Harrison standing near the far window, and Harrison's face did something none of the others did. Harrison looked at Edmund Hargrove and measured him, quickly and professionally, the way a man measures an obstacle. Edmund walked to the center of the room. His legs were shaking. He didn't stop. He stopped in the middle of the floor and stood, and the silence held, and then he spoke. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His voice was rough, thin from disuse, stripped of its usual authority, but steady enough. "I understand there was important business being discussed." Phoebe's voice came back first, and the speed of it was almost admirable, the speed of a woman who had not survived this long by freezing. "Edmund," she said it with warmth, with relief, with the precise calibration of a wife overcome. She took a step toward him. "Edmund, my God, you're awake!" "I have been awake," he said, "for some time." He said it quietly, but it carried. Phoebe stopped. The warmth on her face held for exactly one more second, and then something shifted behind it, some internal architecture under enormous pressure, and what remained was a very careful blankness. "I wasn't able to move," Edmund continued, speaking to the room, to Alderton, to Betrayal, to the families, to the Reverend, or speak. But I could hear, quite clearly. He paused. "I have heard a great many things over the last 5 weeks. Alderton rose from his chair. "Edmund, good God, man, sit down, you look—" "I'll stand, if it's all the same," Edmund said. "I've been lying down long enough." A sound moved through the room, something between a breath and a murmur. Commissioner Betrayal leaned forward. Reverend Parks clasped both hands together. Edmund looked at Aldridge. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, "you have a document in your possession, a deed of trust, executed approximately 3 weeks ago, that purports to transfer this estate." He kept his voice even. "I am standing in my own drawing room, in the presence of a county judge, informing you that that document was obtained under false pretenses, and I am contesting it in full." Aldridge opened his mouth. "I have 2 witnesses to its execution," Edmund said, before Aldridge could form a word. "I have a copy of the document itself, and I have testimony from a member of your staff regarding the circumstances under which it was prepared." He paused. "You may wish to think carefully before you speak." Aldridge closed his mouth. Alderton moved. The judge crossed the room in 4 strides, placed both hands on Edmund's shoulders, and looked at him with the particular intensity of a man deciding what he's actually seen. "Are you telling me," Alderton said carefully, "that you were cognizant during these weeks?" "Yes, sir." "And that documents were executed transferring your property during that time?" "Yes, sir." "With your knowledge?" "Without my consent." Edmund met the judge's eyes. "There is a distinction." Alderton turned around slowly and looked at Phoebe. And Phoebe, who had survived everything with her face composed and her voice steady, looked back at the judge and at her husband and at the 12 families watching from their chairs. And for the first time in 5 weeks, Edmund saw her calculate the room and find the numbers didn't add up. Then Harrison moved. He didn't run. That wasn't his way. He moved with the measured deliberateness of a man who had extracted himself from difficult rooms before and believed he could do it again, toward the far door, the side entrance, the way he'd come in. Robert was already there. Robert Hargrove, who had spent 6 days quietly and methodically ensuring that every exit from this particular room was covered, stepped into the doorway and folded his arms. "Leaving so soon?" Robert said pleasantly. Harrison stopped. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Robert continued. "Robert Hargrove, of Annapolis, Edmund's cousin." He tilted his head. "You must be Gerald Harrison, of Meridian Land Partners." A beat. "And also of the Payne estate matter in Alexandria, and the Holloway property outside Fredericksburg, and the Weston affair in Richmond, which I understand is still under examination by the county court." He smiled the smile of a man who has done his research. "Shall I continue?" The room had gone so quiet that Edmund could hear his own heartbeat. Harrison looked at Robert. Then he looked at Edmund. Then he looked at Phoebe. And Phoebe looked at Harrison. Really looked at him, for what Edmund suspected was the first time without the filter of what she wanted to see. And something shifted in her face. Something that was not guilt and not fear, but was something more complicated than either. The look of a woman who had just understood the shape of the trap she'd walked into, and understood simultaneously that she had walked in of her own free will, and that the man holding the door had never intended to share the winnings. 50%, Edmund said. Phoebe turned to look at him. "The deed of trust names a co-beneficiary," Edmund said. He kept his voice level. He wasn't doing this to wound her, or rather, if he was, that wasn't the primary purpose. The primary purpose was the judge and the commissioner and the 12 families. "Meridian Land Partners, Mr. Harrison's company, half the estate." He paused. "Did you know that, Phoebe?" The silence stretched, and Phoebe, who had been so careful, so composed, so perfectly constructed for 5 weeks, Phoebe looked at Gerald Harrison, and her careful face cracked along a line Edmund had never seen before. A line that ran straight through whatever she had believed this was going to be. "You told me it was standard language," she said to Harrison. Her voice was very quiet. Harrison said nothing. "You said the second addendum was standard legal." "Mrs. Hargrove," Aldridge's voice, clipped and warning. She turned on him. "Don't." It was one word, but it was a different Phoebe behind it. Not the composed woman who had spent 5 weeks managing a household and an attorney and a scheme. This was someone stripped of a layer, someone who had just discovered that the game she thought she was playing had a different board entirely. Edmund watched her. He had expected to feel something large when this moment came. Satisfaction, maybe. Or the cold, clean finish of vindication. What he felt instead was quieter and more complicated. The feeling a man has when he looks at wreckage and understands both that it had to come down and that something real was lost in the falling. He had loved her. Not well, maybe, not wisely, but he had loved her. He let himself acknowledge that for exactly one moment. Then he turned to Judge Alderton. "I believe," Edmund said, "that you have everything you need." Judge Alderton did not move immediately. That was the thing about Alderton. He had spent 30 years on the bench, and he had learned that a man who moves immediately in a charged room often moves wrong. He stood at the center of Edmund's drawing room and looked at every face in it, one by one, the way a man reads a document before he signs it. Then he turned to Commissioner Burrell. "James," he said, "I need you to step outside and send your driver for the county constable." Burrell was already standing. "Consider it done." The room shifted. That single instruction, quiet, matter-of-fact, The ordinary language of authority changed the temperature of everything. The 12 families who had come to a prayer gathering and found themselves inside a different kind of reckoning entirely drew back in their chairs. The Reverend Parks clasped his hands tighter. Aldridge, in the corner, had developed the focused stillness of a man running through options and finding them limited. And Harrison, Gerald Harrison, who had walked into this room believing he was attending the final act of a plan 5 years in the making, looked at Robert Hargrove blocking the side door, and made the calculation that Edmund had been waiting to see him make. He tried the front. He moved toward the main entrance with that same measured deliberateness, the walk of a man who has not decided to run because running would be an admission, and running was beneath him. And he still believed, still, even now, that he could talk his way to the other side of this. Edmund's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Mr. Harrison." Harrison stopped, did not turn immediately. Edmund gave him the moment. Let it sit, let the room breathe. And then Harrison turned, because not turning was worse. "I know about the Payne estate," Edmund said. "I know about the Holloway property. I know about the Weston affair." He kept his voice even and his eyes steady. "And I know that what you've built with Meridian Land Partners is not a land investment firm. It is a mechanism for taking things from people who are too vulnerable to defend themselves." He paused. "You found my wife. You cultivated her. You pointed her at me, and you stood back and waited for the estate to change hands. That is what you do. That is who you are." Harrison's face was very composed. He was good at composed. He'd had a great deal of practice. "You have no evidence of anything improper," Harrison said. "I have a colleague in Baltimore," Robert said from the doorway, "who has documented your involvement in 3 property transfers that preceded the unexpected deaths or incapacitations of the male property holders. I also have a letter from Margaret Payne's son, who has been looking for exactly the right venue to present his family's grievance." He tilted his head. "Judge Alderton is a very convenient venue." Alderton, who had been listening with the focused quiet of a man gathering everything before he speaks, turned to Harrison. "You'll remain in this room until the constable arrives." Harrison looked at the judge, then at Robert, then at Edmund. Something moved behind Harrison's composed face. Not fear, exactly. Men like Harrison didn't fear the way ordinary people feared. It was more like the look of a man recalculating and finding that the numbers, for the first time in a long time, were running against him. "I'll need to speak with counsel," Harrison said. "You'll have that opportunity," Alderton said. "After." Edmund let Robert guide him to a chair. He didn't want to sit. Every instinct he had said to stay standing, to keep his feet under him, to hold the room with his physical presence the way he'd been holding it for the last 10 minutes. But his legs had reached the limit of what the last 6 days of work had built, and pride was a luxury he couldn't afford to spend on falling down. He sat. Clara appeared from the hallway. He didn't know how long she'd been there, whether she'd come from the kitchen or been in the corridor the whole time. But she appeared with a glass of water and pressed it into his hands with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been managing this household through impossible things and was not about to stop now. He drank. Across the room, Phoebe had not moved from where she'd been standing when Edmund walked in. She stood near the fireplace and she was still. Not the composed still of a woman in control, but the still of a woman who has run out of the next move and is standing in the space where the next move should be. Edmund watched her. He had spent 36 days building toward this moment, and he had thought about it from every angle he could find. And the one thing he had not been able to fully predict was this, the particular quality of Phoebe's stillness. The way she looked not defeated, but evacuated, as if whatever had been animating her for 5 weeks had simply stopped. Judge Alderton crossed to him. "Edmund," he kept his voice low, for Edmund alone. "Are you well enough to give a full account today? I can have this formalized through proper channels over the next week if you need." "I'm well enough," Edmund said, "and I'd rather it be today." Alderton studied him. "All right." He straightened. "Then let's do this properly." He turned to the room. When Alderton used his courtroom voice, even in a drawing room, even without a bench or a gavel, people arranged themselves accordingly. The family settled. Aldridge stopped his quiet movement toward the window. Harrison, with Burrell's returned presence now blocking the main entrance, went back to his careful stillness. "I'm going to ask some questions," Alderton said. "And I am going to ask them in the presence of these witnesses because what has been alleged here today is serious enough that I want no ambiguity about what was said, by whom, and in what order." He looked at Aldridge. "Mr. Aldridge, did you prepare a deed of trust at the request of Mrs. Hargrove, transferring this estate held in trust under your firm?" Aldridge's jaw tightened. "I prepared documents at my client's request, yes." "Was the property holder, Mr. Hargrove, consulted?" "My client had legal authority. That is not what I asked." Alderton's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Was Mr. Hargrove consulted?" A silence. "No," Aldridge said. "He was not." The word fell into the room like a stone into water. Edmund watched the ripple move through the 12 families. Watched Reverend Parks close his eyes briefly. Watched two of the women, Miriam Alderton, the judge's own wife, who had come as a guest, and Frances Burrell, the commissioners, exchange a look that carried the full weight of what women communicate to each other when they witness a thing they have suspected. "The document," Alderton said. "Do you have it with you?" Aldridge hesitated. It was a very small hesitation, barely a breath. But Edmund had spent 5 weeks becoming extraordinarily attuned to hesitation. "Robert," Edmund said. Robert reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded document. Edmund recognized it. Thomas had gotten it from Foster, and Foster had gotten it from the office files. And it had traveled an interesting route to arrive in Robert's coat pocket that morning. "A copy," Robert said, presenting it to Alderton. "The original should be in Mr. Aldridge's office." Aldridge stared at the copy in Alderton's hand with the expression of a man watching something he'd assumed was secure prove otherwise. "Foster," he said, almost to himself. Almost. "He's a decent young man," Edmund said. He knew what was right. It just took someone asking him plainly. Alderton read. The room waited. Edmund breathed steadily and kept his back straight against the chair and watched Harrison across the room. And Harrison watched him back with those careful, measuring eyes. "The co-beneficiary clause," Alderton said, not looking up from the document. "Meridian Land Partners." He lowered the paper and looked at Harrison. "You have a financial interest in this estate through this document. I have a business interest in the proposed trust arrangement," Harrison said smoothly, "which is entirely legal." "It is not legal," Edmund said, "when the arrangement was facilitated through misrepresentation of my condition to my wife, cultivation of her interests over a period predating my accident, and the deliberate use of legal language designed to obscure material facts from the co-signing party." He looked at Harrison. "My wife did not know you were taking half, did she?" Harrison said nothing. "Did she?" Edmund said again. "Phoebe," Alderton said, turning to her, "did you know that Meridian Land Partners was named as a co-beneficiary of the trust? To a 50% share?" The room turned to Phoebe. Phoebe looked at the judge, then at the document in his hands, then, slowly, at Harrison. "No," she said. "I did not know that." It was the first honest thing Edmund had heard her say in a very long time. The constable arrived inside 40 minutes. His name was Garrett, and he was a practical man who had ridden out to the Hargrove estate expecting some kind of domestic dispute, and arrived to find a judge, a commissioner, a room full of prominent county families, one visibly ill duke who was somehow upright, one attorney in the corner with the look of a man reviewing his professional choices, and Gerald Harrison standing by the far wall with the contained expression of a man waiting to execute a contingency plan. Garrett took one look at Alderton, received a brisk 3-sentence summary, and had Harrison's arm in his hand within a minute. "You'll come with me, sir," Garrett said. Harrison went. He went with composure and with silence, which was the choice of a man who understood that everything he said from this moment forward would be used, and who was smart enough to stop talking. At the door, he stopped for half a second, just half, and looked back at the room. His eyes found Edmund's. Edmund looked back at him without expression. Harrison left. Aldridge remained. He had not been restrained, not yet, but Alderton's look communicated clearly enough that leaving was not an option he should explore. He sat in a chair near the window and folded his hands on his knee and stared at the middle distance with the expression of a man constructing his defense one brick at a time. The 12 families began the quiet shuffle of people who understand they have witnessed something significant and are not quite sure of the etiquette surrounding it. Judge Alderton spoke to several of them in low tones. Betrayal moved through the room with the practiced social fluency of a politician managing the aftermath of something unscripted. Robert came and crouched beside Edmund's chair. "You need to lie down," he said quietly. "Not yet. Edmund, not yet." He kept his eyes on Phoebe, who still hadn't moved from the fireplace. "There's one more thing." Robert followed his gaze, said nothing, stood up and stepped back. Edmund pressed both hands on the arms of the chair and stood. It was harder than sitting down had been. His legs communicated their opinion of this decision quite clearly. He didn't particularly care about their opinion. He walked across the room to where Phoebe stood. She watched him come. Her eyes followed him, and her face held that evacuated quality. Stripped of the careful performance, stripped of the planning and the composure, left with something Edmund had rarely seen in 4 years of marriage. Something that was simply Phoebe, unguarded and frightened and tired. He stopped in front of her. "He found you," Edmund said quietly. Just to her now, under the noise of the room. "Harrison, he sought you out deliberately, didn't he?" She looked at him. "When?" he asked. 8 months ago," she said. Her voice was low and controlled, but it was the control of effort now, not ease. "At the Morley gathering in Richmond. He introduced himself as a land investor. He was charming." A pause. "He asked about the estate, about you, and you told him." "I told him what everyone in the county knows." Her chin lifted slightly. "I didn't tell him anything private." "But he listened," Edmund said. "And he came back." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Edmund looked at his wife, at the woman he had spent 4 years living beside without fully seeing, and she had spent 4 years living beside him without fully speaking. And somewhere in that gap between not seeing and not speaking, a man like Harrison had found room to build something terrible. "Phoebe," he said, "what did you want? Not from the estate, not from the money." He kept his voice level. "What did you want?" She looked at him for a long moment. "To not be managed," she said finally. "To not be a thing that gets managed by a kind, decent, completely oblivious husband who discusses wheat yields at dinner and asks me how I'm feeling the way a man checks his pocket watch." Her voice didn't rise. It stayed level. "I wanted to matter. I wanted to make decisions. I wanted—" She stopped. "It doesn't excuse what I did." "No," Edmund agreed. "It doesn't." She looked at the floor. "I know." "I would have listened," he said. "If you had told me. I would have tried." She looked up then, and what crossed her face was complicated and real and too late.
"I know that too," she said. "Now."
Edmund held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned and walked back to his chair. Alderton handled Aldridge for another hour. Edmund stayed for the first 30 minutes of it, long enough to provide his account formally, with Robert beside him and Betrayal writing down every word in the quick, careful hand of a man who understood public record. He described what he had heard during the 5 weeks of his confinement. He described the document, the conversations, Harrison's visits, the East Field buyer. He described it all in the flat, methodical tone of a man who has had 5 weeks to organize his testimony and has done so with considerable thoroughness. Aldridge interjected twice. Both times, Alderton silenced him with a look. At the 40-minute mark, Clara appeared in the doorway and looked at Edmund the way Clara looked at him when she had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it. Edmund excused himself. Robert walked with him upstairs. Thomas materialized from somewhere, the kitchen passage probably, and took Edmund's other arm at the foot of the stairs without comment. The way Thomas did things, quietly and effectively, and without requiring acknowledgement. The three of them got Edmund upstairs and through the bedroom door, and Edmund sat on the edge of the bed, and the shaking in his legs that he'd been suppressing for an hour finally had room to express itself.
"Well," Thomas said. "Well," Edmund agreed. "You walked into that room and half of Albemarle County watched Gerald Harrison get handed to the constable," Thomas said. "I'd call that a fair return on 5 weeks of work." Edmund looked at him. "The East Field." "Stopped cold, sir. Hoskins got the letter 2 days ago. He's not happy, but he doesn't have a legal leg under him." "And the staff notices? The ones Phoebe sent?" Thomas's expression shifted to something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood.
"I may have quietly communicated to the affected parties that those notices were issued without proper authority and should be considered void pending the estate holder's review." Edmund looked at him for a moment. "You were confident I'd make it downstairs." "I was confident you'd die trying if necessary," Thomas said. "Which amounts to the same thing, in practical terms." Edmund exhaled, something that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a breath, but lived between the two. Then Clara came through the door with broth and the expression of a woman who had been holding herself together through the most extraordinary afternoon of her professional life and was now choosing to channel all of that into making sure Edmund ate. "Drink this," she said. "All of it." He drank. Thomas stayed. Robert stayed. Clara moved around the room, doing the things Clara did, and for a while no one said anything of consequence, and Edmund sat with the strange, quiet weight of what the afternoon had been. He had expected to feel like a victor. He had expected the clean, bright feeling of a thing finished correctly. What he felt instead was something more like exhaustion, with grief underneath it. The specific exhaustion of a man who has fought a very long battle against people who used to be part of his ordinary life, and has won, and knows the winning doesn't make the loss unfelt. "Robert," he said. "Yes?" "The Payne family in Alexandria. The son who has the grievance." "William Payne, 32 years old, attorney. He's been trying to bring something actionable against Harrison for 2 years without enough evidence." Robert paused. "He'll have it now." "See that he gets what he needs." Edmund looked at his cousin. "Harrison's done this at least 3 times that we know of. There are probably others. Every one of those families deserves their chance." Robert nodded. "I'll write to William tonight." Edmund set the empty cup down, looked at his hands. The same hands that had spent 5 weeks inching toward movement, that had gripped the banister an hour ago and refused to let go. "There's one more thing I need to know," he said, "about Harrison." He looked at Robert. "The Payne husband. and the Holloway man. He let the sentence sit. Robert understood him. Robert had always understood him quickly. The Holloway case was ruled natural causes, Robert said carefully. Edmund Payne died of a fever, officially. Officially. Yes. The words sat in the room. Edmund thought about it. He thought about the carriage accident. Belle shying suddenly, violently, at something in the road. He thought about 6 years of steady temperament from that horse. He thought about what a man like Harrison might or might not have arranged on a Tuesday morning in July, when Edmund Hargrove was riding alone to Charlottesville with a letter in his coat. "Garrett needs to know," Edmund said. "He needs to look at the accident, the road, whatever is left of it." Robert's face had gone very still. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think a man who has profited 3 times from the incapacitation of property holders in Virginia might find it useful to ensure the incapacitation occurs on schedule." Edmund's voice was steady. "I think Belle is a steady horse. I think something scared her that morning. And I think a man who is careful enough to hide a co-beneficiary clause in a legal addendum is careful enough to ensure he gets value for his investment." The silence in the room was a different quality than any of the silences that had preceded it. Thomas sat down heavily in the chair by the window. Clara had gone very still in the corner. Robert said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I'll speak to Garrett tonight." "Don't tell Alderton yet," Edmund said. "Not until Garrett has looked at the road. I won't make an accusation like that without something behind it." "And if Garrett finds something?" "Then it stops being a property dispute," Edmund said, "and becomes something considerably more serious." He paused. "And Harrison will have cause to be grateful that Robert Hargrove was standing in that doorway today. Because if Garrett finds what I think Garrett might find, the alternative to Robert standing in that doorway would have been considerably worse." The room held that. Then Robert stood, squared his shoulders, and moved toward the door with the purposeful tread of a man who has a great deal to do and intends to do all of it. "Rest," he said. "I'll handle Garrett." "Robert," his cousin stopped. "Thank you," Edmund said, "for coming." Robert looked at him, just for a moment, the look of 2 people who grew up together and know the full weight of what the other means. "You'd have come for me," Robert said simply, and left. Alderton came up at 6 in the evening, after the guests had gone, and the house had settled into the particular quiet of a place where something large has just finished happening. He sat in the chair Robert had vacated, and looked at Edmund with the directness of a man who respected other men enough to speak plainly. "Aldridge will cooperate," he said. "He's not a courageous man. He'll give us everything he has on Harrison in exchange for the court's consideration in his own proceedings." "That's what I expected," Edmund said. "The deed of trust is void. I'll have that in writing by Monday." Alderton paused. "The estate is yours, Edmund, unambiguously and completely." Edmund nodded. "Phoebe," Alderton said. "She didn't leave. I thought you should know that. She's been in the morning room since the constable left with Harrison, just sitting." Edmund said nothing. "What do you want to do about her?" Alderton asked. "Legally, you have grounds for—" "I know what grounds I have," Edmund said. "Let me think on it." "Of course." The judge stood. "For what it's worth, what you did today took considerable courage. I've seen men with full use of their bodies do less." He paused at the door. "Get some rest. There's more to be done, but it can wait until morning." He left. Edmund lay back against the headboard and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house around him. Clara moving in the kitchen below. Thomas's voice somewhere outside, giving instructions in the quiet, efficient way Thomas gave instructions. The creak of the settling house which he knew the way he knew his own breathing, every joint and board of it, every particular complaint of old timber. His house. Still his. He thought about Phoebe in the morning room, sitting in the quiet. He thought about what she'd said. To not be managed. To matter. He thought about 5 weeks in a bed, hearing everything and being unable to speak. He thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that he understood wanting to be heard more than he had ever understood it before. He thought that understanding did not change what she had done. He thought that what she had done might not be the worst of what Harrison had done, and what Harrison had done might not end with property. He thought that a woman who had been found and cultivated and used by a man who had done this before was a different kind of culpable than a woman who had designed the whole thing herself. He was not going to forgive her. That was not the direction his heart was moving. But he was going to be precise about what she was and what she wasn't, because a man who had just spent 5 weeks demanding precision from a situation that wanted to be simple owed himself the same standard in everything that came after. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 36 days, Edmund Hargrove fell asleep in his own house, knowing exactly what it still was. His. And what it was going to become was something he would decide himself when he was ready, with his eyes fully open. Garrett found something on the road. He found it on Sunday morning, 2 days after the gathering, on the stretch of the Charlottesville Road where the carriage had gone into the ravine. Edmund didn't go himself. He wasn't ready for that yet. And Robert went instead. And when Robert came back, his face had the particular quality of a man carrying information he wishes he didn't have. He sat down in Edmund's room, and he didn't speak for a moment. "Tell me," Edmund said. "There's a post on the east side of the road," Robert said, "about 40 yards before the drop. Garrett found rope fiber on it. Old fiber, weathered now, but it was there." He paused. "The kind of fiber you'd get from a length of cord strung low across a road. The kind a horse hits at a full canter and shies from hard." The room was very quiet. "Someone strung a cord across that road," Edmund said. Garrett believed so, yes. Edmund sat with that. He had suspected it, had let himself suspect it in the careful, methodical way he'd been letting himself suspect things for 5 weeks, building towards certainty instead of jumping to it. But suspecting and knowing were different weights, and the knowing settled into him now with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weakness still in his legs. Someone had meant for him to go into that ravine. "Harrison," Edmund said. "We can't prove it was Harrison directly," Robert said. "Not yet. The cord is gone. Garrett says it was likely removed after the accident. The fiber is suggestive, not conclusive." He paused. "But Garrett is a thorough man, and he's going to be thorough about this. And when William Payne brings his case against Harrison in Alexandria, Garrett's findings will be part of the record." "It'll take time," Edmund said. "Yes, it will." Edmund thought about Margaret Payne's husband, about the Holloway man, about how many times Harrison had done a version of this, moving through Virginia like a quiet tide, finding vulnerable points in wealthy households and pressing them until something gave. "He won't get out of this," Edmund said. It was not a question. It was not even reassurance. It was the flat statement of a man who had built a case with care and knew exactly what it contained. "No," Robert said. "He won't." On Monday, Alderton delivered the written declaration that the deed of trust was void. He came himself, which Edmund hadn't expected. Could have sent a clerk. Could have had the document messengered out from Charlottesville. But Alderton came in person and sat across from Edmund in the study and set the document on the desk between them. Edmund read it twice. Then he set it down. It's over, Alderton said. Legally. The estate is unencumbered. And Aldridge? He's been cooperative. Alderton's voice held the particular neutrality of a judge describing something distasteful but necessary. He gave us 3 years of documentation on Harrison's transactions. Names, amounts, dates. Harrison used Aldridge's firm for 2 of the 4 cases we've identified. Aldridge chose to look away from details he should not have looked away from. A pause. He'll face a reckoning. Not as severe as Harrison's, but a reckoning. Good, Edmund said. Alderton looked at him. And Phoebe? It was the question Edmund had been carrying for 2 days, turning it over the way you turn a stone, examining what was underneath it from different angles. She signed documents that could have cost me everything, Edmund said. She brought Harrison into this house. She ordered mourning fabric before I was dead. He stopped. She also didn't know he was taking half. She also signed those documents believing, wrongly, completely wrongly, that she was making a decision about her own future, not understanding that she was executing someone else's plan. That doesn't absolve her, Alderton said carefully. No, it doesn't. Edmund looked at the voided deed on his desk. But the law has options between absolution and prosecution. I want the marriage dissolved. I want her gone from this estate, cleanly and legally. I don't want her imprisoned. He paused. What Harrison did to her, finding her, cultivating her, making her feel like she was the architect when she was really the instrument, that's its own punishment. She'll live with understanding that. Alderton was quiet for a moment. You're a more measured man than most would be in your position. I spent 5 weeks being measured, Edmund said. I got good at it. The judge very nearly smiled. I'll have the dissolution paperwork drawn up through proper channels. It will be quiet, and it will be final. That's all I need. After Alderton left, Edmund sat in his study for a long time. It was the first time he'd been in this room since the accident. Since before the accident. And the familiar weight of it was both strange and steadying. The desk his father had used. The window that faced east toward the fields. The chair that had held him through 20 years of estate decisions and correspondence, and the ordinary serious business of a man's life. He was back in it. He let himself feel that fully. Let himself feel the solidity of the chair and the desk and the window, and the fact that he was sitting here, upright and awake, and in possession of his own mind and his own house. He had earned the right to feel that fully, and he took it. Then he pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer and picked up his pen, and he began to write. Clara found him there an hour later. She stopped in the doorway when she saw him, the pen moving across paper, the posture of a man at work, the ordinary and extraordinary sight of Edmund Hargrove at his own desk. And she made a sound that she immediately tried to cover with a clearing of her throat that convinced no one. I brought coffee, she said. Thank you, Clara. She set it down, didn't leave. He looked up. Say what you're going to say, he said. She folded her hands in front of her apron. I'm going to say that I should have spoken sooner. 6 months ago, a year ago, when things in this house were the kind of things that, looking back, should have been spoken about plainly. She met his eyes. I saw things I told myself wasn't my place to mention. The way she spoke to the staff when you weren't present. The way she managed correspondence that went through this house. Small things. I told myself it wasn't my place. Clara, I'm not finished. Her voice was firm and gentle at the same time, the particular combination she'd been using on him since he was 12 years old. I was wrong. It is always a person's place to speak the truth to someone they care about, whatever the discomfort of it. She paused. I won't make that mistake again. Edmund held her gaze. You spoke when it mattered. The morning you told me something wasn't right in this house. You spoke when most people would have stayed quiet.
Wasn't enough.
It was enough to save the East Field, Edmund said. It was enough to give Thomas time. It was enough that I knew I wasn't alone in that bed. His voice was quiet and direct. It was enough, Clara. It was what I needed. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, the way Clara nodded when she was accepting something she didn't entirely agree with, but recognized she wasn't going to win. "Drink your coffee," she said, "while it's hot." She left. Edmund drank his coffee. Then he went back to writing. Thomas came at noon, and he came with a problem. Edmund heard it in his knock. 2 sharp raps, the Thomas knock of something that needs addressing today, not tomorrow. He came in and stood the way Thomas stood when he had bad news he didn't want to dress up. "Hoskins sent a man," Thomas said, "this morning. He wants to discuss the East Field sale." "The sale is void. I sent him a letter." "Yes, sir, and he received the letter. And he sent a man anyway." Thomas paused. "He's claiming that Mrs. Hargrove verbally committed to the sale before the written agreement was stopped, and that he has a witness to that verbal commitment, and that he intends to pursue the matter through the county court." Edmund set down his pen. "On what legal basis?" His man mentioned promissory estoppel. Edmund was quiet for a moment, thinking. Promissory estoppel. The argument that a verbal promise, relied upon in good faith, created a binding obligation even without a written contract. It was a legitimate legal theory. In the hands of a competent attorney, it could create real complication. "Who's his attorney?" Edmund asked. "Man named Carlyle from Fredericksburg." Edmund thought about that. "Carlyle is good. He's not cheap." "No, sir." Edmund picked up his pen again. "Send word to Hoskins' man that I will meet with Hoskins personally. Thursday, here at the estate." He wrote as he talked. "And send word to Judge Alderton, not asking for intervention, just informing him that there may be a supplementary matter arising from the Harrison situation that involves the East Field." He paused. "Alderton will understand what that means." "You think Hoskins was working with Harrison?" "I think Hoskins arrived very quickly with a very specific buyer's price for a very specific piece of property," Edmund said. "I think a man who arranges carriage accidents and co-beneficiary clauses is careful enough to have his property buyer positioned before the property officially becomes available." He looked at Thomas. "I think Thursday will be an interesting conversation." Thomas allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Yes, sir." "One more thing," Edmund set the pen down. "The staff notices Phoebe issued. The people she let go." "Already handled, sir. Everyone who wanted to return has been contacted." Edmund looked at him. "Already?" "I told you I believed you'd make it downstairs." Thomas's voice was even. "I thought it wise to prepare for what came after." Edmund looked at his estate manager for a long moment, at the weathered face and the steady eyes and the 20 years of quiet, absolute reliability that stood in front of him in a practical coat with a hat in his hands. "Thomas," he said, "your salary is doubled, effective the 1st of next month." Thomas blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise Edmund had seen from him in years.
"Sir, that's not—"
"It is necessary," Edmund said. "It has been necessary for some time. I should have attended to it before now." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, sir," he said, quietly, and meaning all of it. "Thank you," Edmund said back, meaning more. He met with Phoebe that afternoon. He had asked Clara to let her know, simply, without ceremony, that Edmund would like to speak with her at 4 o'clock in the study, if she was willing. The "if she was willing" was deliberate. He was not going to summon her. He was not going to manage her. He was going to offer her the same plain dealing he intended to extend to everyone in this house going forward, including the woman who had tried to take it from him. She came at 4. She came in the same dress she'd been wearing at the gathering. She hadn't changed, or, if she had, it was to something similarly dark. And she sat in the chair across the desk and looked at him with the same stripped, exhausted quality he'd seen in her face on Saturday when the room had pulled apart around her. "Alderton is processing the dissolution," Edmund said. "It will be quiet. It will be legal. It will be final." She nodded. "You will receive what the law provides for in these circumstances," he said. "Not what the deed of trust would have given you. That document is void. But what a wife is entitled to under the terms of our original marriage arrangement. Your personal property, your clothing, the jewelry your family gave you. A settlement sufficient to establish yourself somewhere else." "Edmund," "Let me finish." He kept his voice level. "I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because the marriage is over, and the manner in which it ends will be determined by the law and by what is fair, not by what I feel." He paused. "I feel a great deal. I am not going to act on it." Phoebe looked at him for a long time. "You're going to let Harrison take everything," she said. "The attention, the prosecution, all of it." "Yes." "And I walk away with a settlement." "Yes." She turned her hands over in her lap, a gesture he recognized, the thing she did when she was thinking through something she hadn't finished thinking through yet. "Why?" she asked. "After what I did?" Edmund was quiet for a moment. "Because Harrison found you for a reason," he said. "He found you because he identified something in this house that could be worked on. And I have spent 5 weeks in a bed thinking about what that something was." He paused. "I was not present in this marriage. Not fully. I was kind. I was decent. I was entirely elsewhere." He met her eyes. "That doesn't give you license for what you did. It doesn't. But it is the truth, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't." Something moved across Phoebe's face, something complex and painful and honest. "He told me you'd never change," she said. "Harrison. He said you were the kind of man who would manage his estate and manage his wife and never once look up long enough to see either of them clearly." "He was right about who I was," Edmund said. "He was wrong about who I intend to be." She looked at him. Really looked, the way two people look at each other when there's nothing left to perform and nowhere left to hide. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I am sorry. For the real parts of it, not for getting caught. For what I chose." "I know," Edmund said. She stood, straightened herself in the precise, deliberate way Phoebe straightened herself when she was preparing to walk through something hard. "I'll be gone by the end of the week," she said. "There's no rush." "There is, for me." She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back one last time. "Edmund, the morning you left for Charlottesville," her voice went very careful, "I didn't know about the road. I want you to know that. Whatever Harrison arranged, I did not know." Edmund looked at her. He held what she'd said, turned it over, looked at it from every angle his careful mind could find. "I know," he said. It was the truth. He believed her. It didn't fix anything, and it didn't change anything, and it was still the truth. She left. The week that followed was the busiest of Edmund Hargrove's life, which was saying something considerable. Hoskins came on Thursday, and the meeting lasted 2 hours. Edmund had Robert in the room, and Alderton informed, and a copy of every document Aldridge had provided about Harrison's involvement in the Eastfield arrangement. Hoskins lasted 40 minutes before his attorney quietly advised him to withdraw the promissory estoppel claim. Hoskins, who was a practical man underneath his bluster, withdrew it. The East Field stayed. Robert spent 3 days in Charlottesville and 2 more in Fredericksburg, working with Garrett and corresponding with William Payne in Alexandria. By the time Robert was ready to return to Maryland, the evidence package against Harrison was substantial enough that 3 county attorneys have expressed interest in its contents, and William Payne's case had moved from theoretical to formally filed. Harrison remained in Garrett's custody, contained and quiet, which Edmund had come to recognize as Harrison's mode of operation when he was recalculating. He was recalculating now against a wall, and he knew it. And the knowing was in his silence. Phoebe left on Friday, as she'd said she would. She left with a trunk and 2 cases and the pearl necklace her mother had given her on her wedding day. Clara told Edmund she left before dawn, which was the thing a proud woman does. She doesn't want an audience for the leaving. Edmund had respected that by not being in the hallway. When Clara told him the carriage had gone, he stood at his study window and looked at the East Field, the same field Hoskins had wanted, the same field that Harrison had priced out before Edmund had even hit the ravine. And he watched the morning move across it, the summer light doing what summer light does in Virginia. And he thought about the last 5 weeks, and everything they had cost, and everything they had, in their strange and brutal way, given back. He thought about what Clara had said. It is always a person's place to speak the truth to someone they care about. He thought about Thomas, doubling back when he'd been given his notice, staying because he couldn't leave. He thought about Robert, who had ridden from Maryland on the strength of a letter and stayed without needing to be asked. He thought about a 22-year-old clerk named Foster, who had handed over a document because someone had asked him plainly and given him a reason to do right. He thought about all of it, and then he sat down at his desk and he wrote. The letter took him most of the morning. It went to every family in the county who had been at the gathering on Saturday. Not a legal document, not a formal announcement, just a letter. Written in his own hand, in his own voice, the way a man writes when he has decided to stop being managed by the distance he keeps from everything. He wrote that the estate was intact and in order. He wrote that the matter of the fraudulent trust was being addressed through proper legal channels. He wrote that he was grateful for the presence of his neighbors as witnesses, and that he intended to be a better neighbor going forward than he had perhaps been in recent years. He wrote that Hargrove Estate was still standing, still his, and intended to remain so. He sealed 32 envelopes and gave them to Thomas to distribute. Then he walked out to the East Field. He walked slowly. His legs were stronger every day, but they still had opinions about extended use. And he walked to the middle of the field, and stood there, and looked at the wheat, which was coming in exactly as strong as he told Thomas it would, which it always did when he paid attention, which he intended to do considerably more of going forward. Thomas came up beside him. Edmund heard the familiar drag on the left heel, felt the comfortable solidity of the man's presence. "East boundary needs looking at," Thomas said. "I know. I heard you told Clara I'd want to see it myself." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Couldn't have you missing things because we were managing them away from you, sir." Edmund looked at the field. "No," he said. "You couldn't." They stood there for a while, in the easy silence of 2 men who have been through something together, and don't need to describe it to each other. The summer morning moved around them, heat coming up, birdsong, the smell of the fields, and the particular richness of Virginia in July. The kind of thing you don't notice until you've spent 5 weeks inside a bed, wondering if you'll ever be outside again. "What do you want to do about the North Timber rights?" Thomas asked. Harrison's firm had expressed interest before all this. There's legitimate value there if we approach it through the right buyer. I want to approach it through someone who isn't connected to a man currently in the county constable's custody, Edmund said. That narrows the field. Considerably. I'll ask Robert before he leaves. Edmund paused. Speaking of which, Robert's salary from the estate for the time he spent here. Sir, he won't accept. He'll accept it as a contribution to the Payne Legal Fund, Edmund said. Make sure William Payne gets whatever Robert won't take directly. Robert will understand. Thomas made a sound that was approximately agreement and approximately admiration. You've thought about all of it, Thomas said. I had a lot of time to think, Edmund said. Yes, sir. I reckon you did. Robert left on Saturday, exactly 1 week after the gathering, exactly 5 weeks and 4 days after the carriage went into the ravine. He stood in the entryway with his coat and his bag and looked at Edmund the way he'd looked at him across the sick room in the early days, with the particular intensity of a man determining whether the person in front of him is going to be all right. You're going to be all right, Robert said. Not a question, a verdict. Yes, Edmund said. The legs? Getting stronger. The estate? Intact. Aldridge? Cooperating. Harrison? In custody and running out of room. Robert looked at him for another moment. Then he picked up his bag. Write to me, he said. Not just when something goes wrong. Write to me when something goes right. I'm tired of only hearing from you in emergencies. Edmund felt something loosen in his chest. Something that had been tight for years, longer than 5 weeks, longer than the accident. The particular tightness of a man who has kept his own counsel for so long, he's forgotten what it felt like not to. I will, he said. Robert shook his hand, held it for a moment, the grip of 2 men who have been to the bottom of something together and come back up. Then he left. Edmund stood in the entryway and listened to the carriage go down the drive and turn onto the road, and he stood there until the sound of it was gone. Clara appeared at his shoulder. Thomas wants to know about the east boundary this afternoon, she said. Tell him I'll be there after lunch. Are you sure your legs? Clara. Yes, sir. My legs are fine. She made the sound she made when she didn't believe him, but was choosing her battles wisely. Then, lunch in an hour. Thank you. She went back to the kitchen. Edmund stood in the entry of his house. His father's house. His house. The house he had almost lost. The house he had gotten back 1 inch and 1 day at a time from the locked room of his own body. And he stood very still for a moment. Not the stillness of a man who couldn't move. The stillness of a man who was choosing to stand here, in this place, on his own feet, with full knowledge of everything it had taken to get back to it. Then he walked to his study, sat down at his desk, picked up his pen, and got to work. Edmund Hargrove had come back to himself, not as the man who had stepped blindly into a carriage on a Tuesday morning and trusted that the road ahead was clear, but as a man who had learned, in the hardest possible way, to keep his eyes open, to listen to the people who carried him, to speak plainly before silence became a weapon used against him. And that man, standing on his own land in the summer of 1814, with 32 letters on their way across Albemarle County, and justice moving steadily toward the man who had tried to take everything from him, was not going back to sleep.